everybody. This is your host, Lo Jackson, here at the You Only Podcast. We're still making podcasts. We're hoping that you're doing well. We haven't heard from you in a while. I built this podcast to help other people and to get people to see things differently, maybe help somebody when they're down. Maybe you're going through some depressed moments. Maybe you're having troubles with finances. Maybe you're struggling at your job. Maybe things just ain't going your way. But on today's show, I'm going to be talking about Edward Bernays. Edward Bernays actually wrote 2 books, and they're called Crystallizing Public Opinion, and that was written in 1923. This was Bernays' first major book and laid out the foundation of public relations as a profession. He explained how to shape and direct public opinion through communication strategies. Essentially, he professionalized the idea of engineering content, in my opinion. Edward Bernays also wrote Propaganda in 1928, and that's the book I'm going to be going over with you today. I'm going to incorporate a little bit of the Bible, a little bit of brain technology, and other aspects. So this is Edward Bernays' Propaganda, which was written in 1928. This book is even more famous and controversial. In Propaganda, Bernays argued that mass manipulation was a necessary tool for democracy, that a small, educated elite should guide the masses by shaping their beliefs and behaviors through persuasive media techniques. And interesting enough, Mr. Bernays was actually, Sigmund Freud's nephew. Is that not crazy? Yeah, the famous psychologist. And you can go back and listen to some of my podcasts that I had done on Sigmund Freud. I thought they were really good because he was actually the basis of this podcast for a while, because all psychologists all over the world, they piggyback off of Sigmund Freud's theories or his predecessor, Carl Jung, and I did a couple of Carl Jung's books as well. Freud believed much of human behavior is driven by unconscious desire, especially sexual and aggressive urges, not logic. And the way his nephew, Mr. Bernays, who we're going to be talking about the book Propaganda today, his application of this is he realized rational arguments alone don't work. Instead of appealing to logic, Bernays crafted campaigns that triggered unconscious desires, especially identity, sex, security, fear, and status. And, he actually took, the psychological theories of id, ego, and superego, and id, desires and urges, he used that to bypass the ego's rational filter by making products and ideas like, Coca-Cola or Pepsi, whatever, appeared to satisfy primal urges, and he shaped buying habits and opinions. And he believed that if you can tie a person's identity to a product, they will defend that product until the day they die. And Freud said people often repressed uncomfortable desires and expressed them systematically. Smoking equals power and freedom. And his nephew took that and he created a campaign, Torches of Freedom, which pushed women in the 1920s to smoke and act like it was a status symbol to be out there smoking. And he was tied to a lot of corporations, a lot of different governments, and this stuff's being used to this day. I do want to say that Edward Bernays, he was actually an interesting person, because why would somebody take something that was meant for good to understand the brain and turn it into evil? Well, it's because right now what's going on in the world is people are actually living pretty much inside the middle of their brains in their hippocampus region. And the hippocampus is your fight, flight, fawn, freeze mechanism. And people just bounce back and forth between those things constantly, instead of trying to focus on mindfulness and being present. And this is actually systematically made for people to stay inside of their hippocampus. Then products are being generated like energy drinks, people are smoking marijuana, cigarettes, all these things that attack your dopamine receptor. It literally blocks your pineal gland, and your pineal gland is considered by some to be your God gland. So there's no connection anymore to God as much as there used to be, because they know all the chemicals now that do things to the human mind, and they've studied this stuff for hundreds of years. Wi-Fi was invented by a woman. She was an actress. I can't think of her name off the top of my head, but that patent laid in the patent office from like World War II all the way up until like the 60s, and then Wi-Fi became a huge deal. So, the pineal gland is the God gland. It's important, but energy drinks and caffeine, it blocks oxygen flow to the brain, which, the brain functions more rapidly and consistently when there's lots of oxygen molecules for it to feed on. The hippocampus is kind of tied to the pineal gland as well. And the hippocampus also, it's in charge of a lot of different things, but that's why some people feel in life they're just surviving and not thriving. They don't know that, but they have formed a system for themselves to keep going, and they continue to do this day in and day out. It causes them to live in that fight, flight, fawn, freeze mentality. Or people will be like, they're living in that spectrum, like some kind of spectrum, like ADD, attention deficit disorder, ADHD, ODD, oppositional defiant disorder, autism, because people are literally living inside the middle of their brain. They're not using their medial lobes. And your medial lobes are right above your eyebrows, and they're in charge of mindfulness, or they're considered the governor of the mind. So in reality, what we should practice is like being present. And how you be present is you stay in your medial lobes, and it feels like you're almost bouncing in between, right above your eyebrows and your eyeballs. And it's your little spirit staying right there. And you have all these emotions and feelings that you feel. But in reality, you are supposed to govern those things. And they're like, oh, I have ADHD, that's why I'm, the class clown. No, you weren't loved enough by your parent. You weren't coddled and given the attention you desired. And, you placed expectations at an early age on your parent, which you should, because you are an infant. And you don't know any better except to do that. But a lot of people don't really see the things that are going on, and I want to stay focused on the book Propaganda, and it was written in 1928 by Edward Bernays. I always want to say his name's Bernays, but it's Bernays, Bernays, and he's Sigmund Freud's nephew. Thank you guys for listening to the You Only podcast. In Propaganda, Bernays argues that manipulation of public opinion is not only inevitable but necessary in modern democratic societies, which I don't really truly agree with that, because I believe that people have the freedom to choose and do what they should. Like, we're losing simple things that we used to teach each other because of this stuff. We are getting sucked into systems where everybody's stressed out and everybody's just in their minds all the time, because in reality it should be mind. Your mind is where your brain is, body is where your heart is, soul is where your stomach is. That's why it says, listen, people say listen to your gut instinct. Your gut instinct is everything, because that's your spirit. That's your Holy Spirit. That's God putting it in you. And you'll feel something when someone comes near you in your energy field, and your spirit knows this person isn't right, and you should be aware and be on alert, because your mind will trigger too at the same time your stomach does. And that's the spirit inside of you. And people don't connect that if we can keep someone constantly in their minds that, if we can manipulate people and the public opinion is not only inevitable but necessary, then people will stay in their minds all the time in their hippocampus fight, flight, freeze, fawn mode, and never go into their medial lobes of being present and being logic. I am not surviving. I am thriving. I have a lot going for me. I'm a human. I'm here now. It's up to me. My feelings are my own. Nobody is in charge of my feelings but me. Nobody can make me feel anything but me. And I hope you enjoy the overview that I'm doing for Propaganda by Edward Bernays. So, Bernays doesn't see this stuff as sinister. He claims that because the masses can't be trusted to make rational, informed decisions alone, an invisible elite skilled in the use of psychology and mass communication must guide their thoughts and actions, which that is what's going on with all the TV ads, the ads on your phone, commercials. We've been over commercialized for so long because that stuff's all mind control, and it was created by Edward Bernays. Bernays, like I said, he doesn't see this as sinister. He frames it as a positive tool for social order and progress. But obviously, it's an idea that sparks ethical debates that continues to this day. He was considered the father of public relation and propaganda because he used this stuff in many different countries. The book Propaganda is about 150 pages long and usually divided into about 11 chapters, each kind of building on the central idea that the conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses as an important element in a democratic society, which that is going on and it's been going on in our country since the 1920s. He also was the guy that said that eggs and bacon are the best for breakfast, and that campaign went nationwide. And then people started dying from, heart failure from too much cholesterol, and we started having huge cholesterol problems from that stuff. But Bernays opens this book by describing modern society as too complex for people to process on their own, which that's ridiculous. People must rely on invisible governors, which is BS, PR experts, public relations, that's stupid, because media has everything to do with the devil and Lucifer. There was sin going on in heaven before the Bible, and Lucifer was trying to be like God, and Lucifer was created nothing but of instruments. So he used all these instruments, which were, electric, strings, brass, horns. He was made up of all these things in heaven. And being made up of all these things leads me to believe that Lucifer's in charge of frequencies. That's all the musical instruments you listen to is changing your mind about everything that's going on around you. I believe that artificial intelligence is the Antichrist. There was a fight going up there because St. Michael and Gabriel were in the fight too. So once that went on, this is my own theory too. Maybe I'm crazy, but think about this. In the Garden of Eden, sin was committed. The serpent came to Eve, and told her to eat the fruit, whatever. But let's rewind for a second. I'm getting into something else, honestly, in this. So, God creates man. He creates him from the soil, and he breathed life into him. What color is the soil? It's black or brown. While the man was sleeping, he took a rib from him. The devil learned surgery instantly, and sex change was possible, and made a woman so he would have a companion there. And he breathed life into her and called her daughter, and he called him son. Now the sin, they say, was that they ate of the forbidden fruit. But what no one thinks about is, why would a brother and a sister have a baby? That's kind of wild. But these are all things that are going on right now. And that's why I wanted to read to you today the book Propaganda by Edward Bernays. Thank you guys for listening to You Only Podcast. Please go back and check out some of my other podcasts. I've done several different American psychologists. I've done Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung. I did William James, the father of American psychology. I have some good ones back there. Check them out. So in the book Propaganda, Edward explains that, or he explains how mass media, like the radio, newspaper, film, can be orchestrated to reach huge audiences, because that's what Lucifer wants you to use, because he's in charge of media. It highlights the power of repetition and emotional appeal. That's why you've seen sex ads ramp up on the TV since the 90s. And it stresses that propaganda must align with existing values. You can't force people to believe things that feel alien. If it feels natural, it'll come naturally. But no human being ever likes change, and that's why people, riot or cause uprisings, is because they don't like change. And also, everybody, be aware that all this technology is controlling all of us, and it has been for a long time. The psychology of public relations in the book Propaganda. Here's where Freud's influence is clear. Bernays shows how tapping into unconscious desires, fears, and herd instincts can gather people's choices. And it's true. That's why, sometimes social outcry is more important than law. And they'll listen to society and put all kinds of people away for a group of people because they're outraged. Bernays, he discusses herd behavior and irrational impulses that can override reason. And we see that often now because people are living in their hippocampus. Even we see it in the dating world between men and women all over the world. It's like men get in this fight or flight, fawn, freeze mode with women and in relationships. They just bounce back and forth, and they don't know what to do because they're not being mindful. They're not using their medial lobes to govern their emotions in the background of, hey, I'm in charge of these emotions. These are my feelings. But business and the public in the book Propaganda shows how corporations use propaganda to create demand for products and shape public attitude. Yes. Old Spice, deodorant, Nair for girls, hair removal, all that stuff, and all those little slogans like Nike. Edward Bernays was the guy that created the Nike slogan. Propaganda and political leadership in the book Propaganda, Bernays argues that politicians must be skillful propagandists. Elections are won by managing perceptions, and that's true because we've seen throughout time, look at Donald Trump, make America great again. It seems like a stupid little slogan, but look at it, it's become some kind of movement to, other people that don't like him, and it's like, oh, okay, that's weird. But he discusses how public opinion polls, staged events, and slogans are tools to engineer consent. Remember that. He discusses how public opinion polls, staged events, and slogans are tools to engineer consent. You don't even know it. Subconsciously, you're consenting when you go to those events, for companies that are doing like CSR work in the community. And CSR work is like, as a corporation who's trying to make their image known in the community so it'll spread by word of mouth. Bernays, he discusses a lot of different things about propaganda and political leadership in this book too, and I find that interesting because you know how many people has read this all over the world? This stuff's being used in your country right now. And it's being used against the sexes too, for men and for women. Women's activities and propaganda. Bernays talks about how women newly enfranchised and more visible in public life became a new target audience, because women were always at home taking care of the kids, instilling morals and values. Well, the governments realized that, hey, mom at home teaching kids about the Lord, we can't have that. We got to do separation of church and state. We can't be having God up in here. He's controlling everything. He's bigger than us. He can't be bigger than us. And that's what's going on with artificial intelligence too. This race between the United States and China for AI greatness. In reality, nobody in the Bible knew what the Antichrist was going to be. It's talked about several times throughout the Bible, and in Revelations, the beast in Revelations is considered the Antichrist, but in reality, the Antichrist can never be omnipresent, omnipotent, or omniscience like God. Only with artificial intelligence is that going to be possible. And the way this propaganda affected women, Mr. Bernays talks about how women, they're newly enfranchised, because they were, like I said, they were at home, instilling morals and values. If they can make her more visible to the public life, she could be a new avenue of revenue for companies. And women in America became the first target audience, and then this stuff spread all over the world. Famous examples, like I said earlier, Torches of Freedom campaign, convincing women to smoke cigarettes in public to break the regular taboos back then, and it boosts the sales of Lucky Strike, which we know Lucky Strike killed a bunch of people from lung cancer. And also propaganda for education was a thing in this book too. He claims propaganda can and should be used for positive social goals, like public health campaigns or educational reforms. He insists manipulation is inherently bad. It depends on the ends, which is probably true and definitely going on. And he talks about social services in this book, similar to education. He shows how charities, social movements, and nonprofits use the same techniques to win support. This normalizes the idea that every organized effort to sway opinion is a form of propaganda. He talks about art and science in the book, shows how the arts and science communities also rely on public relation to gain funding, prestige, and public trust. And right now, Donald Trump, he's trying to defund public relation because they have pushed so much propaganda, because they were using Edward Bernays' theories that he had stolen from his uncle's hard work about the brain, and realized he could use it to generate a revenue and mind control. In the 50s, fluoride being poured into our water was actually a government theory that fluoride could control people's minds. And another one was the movie The Twilight Zone. When you see that little thing spinning on the TV, that little spinning object was real. They tried to use that and tie people to chairs and make them watch that for hours and hours, and then try to make them do things that they wanted them to do, and then it didn't work. In the book Propaganda, here's a practical look at how to run campaigns, and this is what he says: use news, events, and influencers. And that's why those people are on social media called influencers, because of this guy. Target key opinion leaders who spread ideas to their networks, and normally these people are controlled by people who have lots of money. Craft messages that connect emotionally, because if you can keep somebody inside their hippocampus and keep crafting messages to connect to their emotions will eventually take over, and their feelings will be all over. They'll be depressed, distraught. They'll be thinking, I'm just surviving, nothing's going right, and be down the dumps. I have ADD, I have ODD, whatever. He also touches on ethics of all this, but concludes it's unavoidable. Which, this guy was not stupid. He was very smart. This stuff is real, and it really does work. And He said the conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Remember that, because that's going on everywhere in the world now. They all use this stuff. And he also said, we are governed. We are governed. Our minds are molded, our tastes formed, and ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of. And then they talk about in the stock market, the Magnificent Seven. These companies aren't called Magnificent Seven for nothing, because they're controlling everything right now, you and me. And remember, he said this too, Edward Bernays, propaganda is the executive arm of the invisible government. And that's what is going on. And the core ideas of this book is public opinion is not naturally formed, it's manufactured. Propaganda can serve good or bad purposes. It's morally neutral. The propagandist is a professional using science and psychology. Democracy relies on people being guided by experts, but sometimes I feel like families, we are our own experts. We have all these tools as a family, and we can get to good if we weren't being tricked by our minds and staying in the hippocampus. If we were more mindful and present, we wouldn't be going through any of these things. And if we realized that the devil's at play here, and unfortunately we have to learn to be mindful, and if we don't, we will face the hells of fire and flame. The impact and legacy of this guy, modern advertising and public relations. Another impact is political campaigning, spin doctors, press secretaries. Debates about media influence and manipulation. Why do you think Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X were always saying, the news entity is the most powerful entity in the world. It can make the innocent guilty, the guilty innocent. And another impact of this was critical theory. Inspired thinkers like Chomsky to warn about media control. All of his writings, Chomsky, is about media control, and he was famous back in 97 or something like that. Ethical criticism of this book, while Bernays saw propaganda as necessary, many critics see it as a blueprint for manipulation, which it is. I read it. It's true. You guys should check it out. It's in the public domain. Get out there and check it out. It raises questions about free will. It exposes how easily truth can be shaped. It forecasts concerns about fake news, mass persuasion, and deep manipulation in social media today. That stuff, it's not good. It's not a good thing. Because modern life is too complex. People can't deeply research every issue, even with the technology now. Instead, they rely on mental shortcuts and trusted authorities, which the Bible tells us we should, which is part of this whole entire story for everyone. We all have a purpose here. This makes them highly susceptible, and the propagandist's job is to craft ideas that can slip into these mental shortcuts and become common sense. And that's what happens to the masses, and that's how we're being controlled. The key idea, if you can control what people see, how they see it, when they see it, and who they hear it from, you can shape their beliefs. And that's how manipulation works. And Bernays says that public response strongly, they respond strongly to events, not dry facts. So the propagandist often creates newsworthy events to frame a message. Here's one. He famously staged the Torches of Freedom March. He hired many people, mostly women, to smoke cigarettes in 1929 in a parade, framing it as a feminist act. This made headline world news. The result? Women smoking became a symbol of liberation. I'm going to do a quick recap and a step-by-step breakdown about propaganda and how it's directly tied to the hippocampus, amygdala, and your medial temporal lobes. Propaganda equals deliberate, systematic attempt to shape beliefs, feelings, and behaviors by controlling information and emotional cues. Hippocampus equals brain structure that forms new declarative memories, which is facts, and events. Remember, events is part of propaganda. Provides context for emotional experience, works with the amygdala, helps recall information later to guide future choices. And how propaganda hijacks the hippocampus? Propaganda is powerful because it changes what the hippocampus stores as true and important. Here's how. Encoding. What gets remembered? The hippocampus decides what to share as long-term memory, especially when it's paired with emotion. Propaganda is designed to add emotional charge such as fear, pride, disgust, hope to information, making it stick. Here's an example. A political ad showing an opponent with scary music. Hippocampus tags that candidate with fear. Context, how you understand information. The hippocampus stores context, the where, when, who, why of a memory. Propaganda changes context. It reframes facts to create a biased storyline. Here's an example. Rebranding a protest as a riot or immigrants as a threat, which we've seen that in recent news. Once the hippocampus stores this framed context, it's hard to unlearn when you later recall the memory. You recall the frame, not just the raw fact. And that's a part of being mindful, using logic and being present. Priming and recalling. What comes to mind later? The hippocampus helps pull stored memories forward when you make decisions. Propaganda repeats messages. Vote for me, vote for me, vote for me. The hippocampus keeps them easily accessible. So when you face a choice, who should I vote for? Should I buy this brand? Your hippocampus retrieves the emotional charged repeated version, not neutral facts. Here's an example of like wartime propaganda. World War II posters showed enemies as monsters. The amygdala triggers fear, so the hippocampus encodes that fear with the image. Years later, people recall the fear and the image together, and it influences public support for the war or a certain type of policy. The memory context is biased forever unless new experiences or critical thinking restructurize it. So, psychology of repetition in the hippocampus plus the amygdala. The hippocampus works with the amygdala. The amygdala tags events with emotion. The hippocampus saves the story. Propaganda manipulates both. Amygdala reacts to fear or pride. And that's why they also use divisions of sexes, men against women, or blacks versus whites, and all that stuff like that. Repetition shrinks the memory's trace. It's why slogans work. Make America great again. Easy to remember, emotionally charged. The battle for your memory. Bernays understood this intuitively. Shape what people see, how they feel. Shape what they remember. Shape what they do. Modern neuroscience confirms it. Propaganda hacks the neural pathways of memory and recall. Once a false or biased narrative is in the hippocampus, tied to a strong emotion, it's resilient. Like I said earlier in the podcast, if you can tie a person's identity to a product, they will defend that product until the day they die. That's why counter propaganda must be recontextualized for the memory. Critical thinking, satire, fact-checking. Those are the most important right now in today's society. And a key point is the hippocampus is the vault of your mind. And that's why people with PTSD can remember so much stuff that happened around the time they, wound up developing PTSD, because it was some kind of traumatic events that forces your hippocampus to recall those memories, and you're tying that to some kind of emotion, so you're having flashbacks constantly. And I know because I suffer from severe PTSD. So remember, a key point, the hippocampus is the vault of your mind. Propaganda sneaks in biased files, labels them with emotion, and locks them away as truth. But we got to be discerning and use critical thinking and logic to realize, hey, wait a minute, that's not my truth. I have a different type of truth. The practical takeaways of this is critical thinking and diverse information sources help the hippocampus build richer context. Emotional regulation keeps the amygdala from hijacking memory storage with fear or rage. And a lot of time people use fear and rage to rise dopamine levels, because dopamine levels triggers that fight, flight, fawn, freeze response as well. Mindfulness reflects media literacy. Fact check your own hippocampus. Where did I hear this? Who benefits if I believe it? Those are things that we need to start really thinking about. Who is this going to hurt if I do this? What will this do to me intrinsically if I decide to do this? And that is called your locus of control. There's internal locus, which is I am in charge and have control over what happens to me internally. And then there's external locus, which is I am not in control of what happens to me externally. And the bottom line, propaganda equals hacking your hippocampus through emotional framing, repetition, and selective content. Understanding this makes you far harder to manipulate, because you see how your own memory vault can be rigged. Thank you guys for listening to the You Only podcast, and hopefully you've enjoyed Edward Bernays, whatever his last name is, propaganda. Go to the public domain, check it out. It's a good book, and it teaches you a lot of different stuff that people use in the world, just to be aware and to have more control over yourself and your feelings, because they want us to be stuck in our hippocampus and our amygdala, our fight, flight, fawn, freeze response, and then to trigger those memories so that you're not using the governor of your mind, which is the medial lobes or the medial temporal lobes. How to use your medial temporal lobes well, especially in the context of staying clear-minded and resilient against manipulation, fear, and reaction loops. And that's something you got to be aware of, is reaction loops. It's a good thing to go into situations and just be a silent observer. The one who says least is actively listening to everything going on around them. They are trying to be mindful. So what is the medial temporal lobe? The medial temporal lobe sits deep inside each side of your brain and contains the hippocampus, the amygdala, and another type of context, and peripheral campal gyrus, which connect memory to other brain regions. All these parts of the brain or why we all are stuck in depression, trauma loops, avoidant attachment styles. And those avoidant attachment, or the different attachment styles, they actually are another way of keeping someone in their hippocampus region of their brain. And some believe that the human body was formed from mycelia. Scientists think this, which is ridiculous, but there has been scientific evidence that certain types of mushrooms change the brain and reduces stress and cortisol levels. And it's been fact-checked that microdosing with psilocybus mushrooms literally connects every region of your brain all at one time, and it heals because none of the regions of your brain are talking to each other. And that is what governments and corporations are capitalizing on, is everyone staying in pretty much the trance mode of technology, and everybody being peddled false information and not being able to think for themselves. Cling to God, for this world was just a test. And if we don't see that every man is created equal and that we all have a purpose here, and that is to do as God is directing in our lives, no matter what we choose, there's a purpose, and God will get us there. And using these brain situations or theories or psychology, this is another way too that it also keeps us in our minds and not in our bodies and our souls. Once we learn to tie all three of these things together, life will become much more meaningful, and governing our minds will be much easier. The amygdala, it can hijack your reactions. It can make you fearful. It gives you the fight, flight, panic response. I kept saying hippocampus, but in reality, the hippocampus stores biased fears, biased fights, biased flight and panic mechanisms, because it takes events that it has seen and it produces images and it pulls memories, and it pretty much manipulates your memories is what the hippocampus does at times, unless you use your medial temporal lobes well to be clear-minded and build resilience. You get stuck in loops of anxiety, shame, or trauma-driven overreactions, and it makes us feel a certain way, and then it makes us feel that we don't have any control. And as we age, it just gets worse if we don't take care of it early on. No one teaches us that we are in charge of ourselves, and that, yes, we have a mom and a dad and all these relatives, but in the end, you came into this world alone. You're going to leave alone. Money don't matter. Clothes don't matter. The governments don't matter. None of this stuff matters. Only really God matters at this point. And hopefully today you can find Jesus in your heart and realize that the more Jesus is in your mind, the more you will be connected to your body and your soul. And together those things are one. And throughout different religions and, beliefs or prophets, like the Native Americans, they believed if you fed the good or the bad wolf, that's who you would become in your life. And it was a metaphor. There's several different ones that, the yin and the yang, the man and the woman, and harmony. There's all kinds of different things out there that we all need to be aware of. But being aware of what's going on around us today with corporations, propaganda, this gentleman, Edward Bernays, how he took his uncle's theories and perversed them to make a profit, and it's being used to this day against every single individual all over the world. It's time to turn back to our home lives, get real with each other, find things that we have in common, stop being scared and frightful. It's like they formed these millennials to be programmed to be isolated to themselves. My feelings matter, my emotions matter, all that social emotional learning. I think they're an interesting group, and I'm excited to see what they become, because God is more apparent than any of this BS in the whole world. And
these kids now, they're realizing that, and God's making a strong comeback all over the world right now. Christianity especially, it's the fastest growing religion anywhere in the world. And when it finally reaches the edge of the earth, Jesus will come back. Trust me, it's here.